2-1. It is a curtain call for the Phil Steele weekend. Games on Friday and Saturday as we wrap up the regular season. Championship weekend will help us solidify bowl game.
Lost you, Kyle.
That could be a problem. All right, we'll see if we can get Kyle back in here. But as to what he was saying, it's championship week in college football. Phil, first off, can we take a look back at last week and what happened? I kind of want to run this by you because I think I could make you proud here. I've been giving out picks on Twitter every Saturday morning. I'm sure you watch it like a hawk. I know you want to know what I'm thinking.
Can't miss.
Every day before kickoff at noon. Besides one really bad week, I've rebounded. I'm now 49-38 on my Twitter picks. That's plus 11, just over 56%. Last week I went 7-3, but I want to run down some of these games. I did have Michigan. I had to do it just because my heart told me to go against Stephen Hartzell, and it worked out for me. Two other games here, Western Kentucky and FAU. The total was 62.5. I took the under. It hit 63 in overtime.
Wow.
Just a brutal beat by half a point there. And then I know you liked Notre Dame and USC under 64. Garbage time touchdown for Notre Dame puts that thing over by a. So the only really bad pick I had was I had LSU to cover at A&M, but I was so close to a 9-1 week there as opposed to 7-3.
Yeah, there's definitely some bad beats last week, like the Boise State-Utah State game where Utah State was about to score at the end of the game and take the lead and ended up not covering plus 16.5. So there was some brutal bad beats last week, and those the two that you had there were a couple of them.
Yeah, they were. Let's see if Kyle can jump back in here.
Or we could just start running down the games if Kyle's not on there. There he is. Can't hear you, Kyle.
Yeah, I don't know. We're still not getting your audio. Try it one more time. No.
I actually hear a faint bit of your voice there, Kyle.
Talk again, Kyle.
The mic is of course being crazy, so I think I'm getting picked up off the computer. You can at least hear me though, correct?
Now
we can hear you now.
Now we can.
Okay. It's not my Heisman moment in the final show of the week. I know Phil has been our Heisman all season long. Caleb Williams may or may not have that locked up. I'm sure Kyle Whittingham will have something to say about that this weekend. So you're helping Tripp pick up the pieces from last weekend. You certainly helped him make some good selections heading into the final regular season weekend of the year. We've got some games, Phil, obviously with championship games taking center stage, but there is a couple non-championship games, and I know the MAC is right up your alley. So why don't we go ahead and just wet our beak first, jump into the kiddie pool, and you give us some insight on Akron and Buffalo as the Bulls look to get bowl eligible. This game does have some meaning. So before we get to the championship games in CUSA and the Pac-12 on Friday night, how do you feel about the Bulls seeking a sixth win of the year against Akron, who's 2-9, and they've lost 10 of 13 overall against the Bulls?
Yeah, Buffalo's actually a better team than the record would indicate this year. You go back and take a look at the last two games. They blew a two-score lead against Central Michigan. They blew a two-score plus lead against Kent State and ended up losing those two games, and that's why they need this sixth game to get to a bowl this year. I like the way that Cole Snyder runs the offense at QB, sitting 59% with a 14-7 ratio. Also a good runner. And when you look at Akron, though, last week they were without DJ Irons, their number one quarterback. So Jeff Undercover steps in and throws for 312 yards. And they not only beat Northern Illinois, they beat them down 44-12. And it's been an Akron team that's doing quite well against the spread. I believe they're on a 6-1 ATS run. The only game they didn't cover was Miami of Ohio recently. So they're playing teams tough. Buffalo's letting teams in the back door. or in this case, beating them despite 2 touchdown deficits. I'm going to go with Akron plus the points in that one.
Well, I think both teams in this game, and that's why I was looking at the over sitting there at 55.5. I mean, Buffalo's defense has been okay, but not great. So this might be a decent spot, like you said, under Cuffler with the game he had last week. A little confidence coming off that might be a good spot at the over. I'll certainly be taking a look at that later on in the day. Let's jump over to Conference USA Championship. We've got North Texas taking on UTSA. North Texas coming in at 7-5. They're also 7-5 against the spread. UTSA 10-2 overall and 6-6 against the spread this year. Last meeting was on October 22nd. UTSA won 31-27, but North Texas led it through 3 quarters, I think, in that game. North Texas, they're going to run the ball. UTSA is going to throw the ball. This is another matchup with 2 potent offenses. I kind of like the over here as well. You look at that last meeting, they only had 9 combined points at halftime, and they still hit 58. So it's 69.5. It's a big number, but I think they might be able to catch it. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, I agree with you on the over in this one, and go back to that first game. It was a game that North Texas took the lead with 1:38 left in the game on a TD pass from Austin Ane, and then UTSA drives down the field and with 15 seconds left in the game gets a 10-yard touchdown pass to pull out the win. Now, the interesting thing that if you look at the game statistically, I know North Texas pretty much was in the lead a good portion of the game. But UTSA actually had a 32-13 first down edge in that game. That would make me a little leery on the North Texas side, but North Texas was playing great football. And if we let me show you one quick thing that'll help you out on this one, Trip, and that is when you take a look at the 2 defenses. Phil Steele plus is color-coded green and red. We take a look at UTSA's offense. You can see it's all green here. They put up a lot of points and do very well. They're plus 70 yards per game over what opponents allow. Look at all the red that they have on defense. They've had some pretty poor defensive outings. Now let's look at North Texas. They have a lot of green on offense. They have a lot of red on defense. So if you put those 2 factors together, that would be to your point, Trip, which would be the over in this game. And as far as the side goes, I think it's going to be an entertaining game. UTSA has been laying a lot of points at home and struggling a little bit to cover the spread at home. So I'd actually lean a little bit with North Texas plus the points, but I think the over might be your best play there.
That was a wild finish to that game, too, earlier this season. Wasn't it, Phil? 31-27 was the final. UTSA had to come from behind like they had here. So, yeah, expect a lot of points. I know it was a slow first half in the earlier meeting mid-season, but UTSA and both North Texas put up a lot of points late. Okay, Utah and Southern Cal. The Trojans are giving 2.5, 66.5 is the total, 8 o'clock on Fox. Big picture question first, Phil. Do you think this game should matter to USC? Should they be penalized if they were to lose because they're playing an extra game while a team like Ohio State, who checks in at number 5 in the college football playoff rankings this week, is the team most expect who would slide in if Southern Cal were to stumble? So should this game matter in a way for the Trojans where it would affect their college football playoff hopes?
Yes. I think if you lose 2 games in a year, no team's ever made the playoffs with 2 wins or with 2 losses on the year. I also think the TCU game matters. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you're rooting for both Kansas State and Utah this weekend.
Yeah, there's no question. Caleb Williams, has he locked up the Heisman Trophy? A lot of people are ready to give him the trophy now after what he was able to do, not just against Notre Dame, but really this last month of the season. We know that award is typically always won in November. If you look at the Heisman odds at this point, minus 3,000. So what is that? It would take a $300 bet to win $10 on Caleb Williams. Certainly he is the favorite by far. Max Duggan checking in plus 2,000. A little bit of value there. C.J. Stroud at plus 2,500. The game itself, though, Phil, Utah winning by a point earlier. That was back on October 16th, 43-42. Cam Rising with that 2-point conversion with 48 seconds remaining. Just an instant classic between those two. I'm kind of leaning the under here, though, 67.5. USC has developed a little bit more of a running game with Travis Dye out. I like what Austin Jones is doing. Maybe that could shave off some possessions, and I think defense will kind of rise to the occasion here in Allegiant Stadium. What do you think?
I'm actually going the other side on that one, Kyle. When I look at this matchup, I think it's a coin flip. I could make a case for Utah, but I could also make a case for USC winning the game. If the number was over 3, I'd probably lean with the dog, but the number's actually under 3. So I think it's tough to lean with the underdog if it's a toss-up game that could easily lose by 3. So I went with the over on this game as my top play. You go back to the opening game that they played, 43-42, and that was all in regulation, no overtime. 85 points. You had one team with 562 yards, the other one with 556 yards. So both teams can put it up. I like the way that Cam Rising's throwing the football. USC's defense has been susceptible. And when I looked at USC Notre Dame last week, I liked the under because Notre Dame was a pure running team and a great defense. And yet the USC Notre Dame game hit 65 points, which is in the same area code that this is. And Utah's got a far more explosive offense and not as good a defense as Notre Dame has. The defensive edge goes to Utah. The offensive edge goes to USC. And I'm leaning with the over in this one for the game. And I think it'll be a fun one to watch and come right down to the final play, much like it did in the first meeting.
By the way, since I fumbled the snap at the start of the show, make sure you follow Phil on Twitter at PhilSteele042. I'm at Kyle Schass. Trip is at TripHer. Go to PhilSteele.com. Get more information about Phil Steele Plus. He's already revealed a little bit about Phil Steele Plus, sharing his screen, showing you green means good, red means bad, a lot of advanced analytical data. Certainly help you to bet smarter, not harder. Be more like Phil Steele. Use the tool that the pro, our Heisman, uses himself, Phil Steele Plus. We'll give out a free subscription for next football season. Details on that still TBD. Just continue to interact with us at CS Now Tweets. Thank you for joining us every Thursday. 15. This is the 15th week we've done this. Seems like we had it kind of feels like we had just started yesterday, but 15 shows, 1 o'clock live every Thursday, with the exception being last week. Thank you again so much for tuning in. As we move to the noon slate, 3 games on Friday, 2 championship games. We go to Saturday. There is a pick that I want to say for the end of the show. At least get your lean on it. I think I'm going to retire the sickos because it's slim pickings. And again, Army and UMass just killed me last week. More on that before we get out of here. But Valpo and New Mexico State, a late game that was added. I'll ask Phil more about that if he's got a lean either way at the end of the show. So I will defer to Trip for the Big 12 title game, a rematch for the 11th time in the Big 12, Trip.
That's right, and if you win, you're in for TCU. They come in undefeated at 12-0, third best record against the spread in all of college football. 9-2-1 are the Horned Frogs. They'll be taking on Kansas State. TCU favored by 2.5. The total at 61.5. But K-State's a dangerous team. They've been over their last 5. They're averaging 40 points a game. They're probably playing their best football of the season. I think they're expecting Will Howard at quarterback again. This is another sneaky little overplay here for me, Phil, but I'm interested to see what you see in this one.
Yeah, and I think we go back and take a look at that first meeting between these two teams, watching the game. Got to be honest with you, I had Kansas State in the game, and with a minute to go in the second quarter, it was a win. I mean, it was 28-10. Kansas State thoroughly dominating the game. They had every advantage going for them. 303 yards offense in the first half, which bodes well for your over, by the way. And then all of a sudden, Will Howard gets hurt, and Howard played a little in the second half. And when he did play, he was nowhere near 100%. He was hobbling around. They had to go to their third string quarterback, Jake Rubley, I think in the second half. Kansas State had like 20 yards offense. They couldn't barely move the football against TCU. Actually had 87 yards offense in the second half, but very few first downs. And TCU was able to come back and get the win. Now, if Will Howard stays healthy all game, you got to think Kansas State's got the advantage. But then it goes back to this TCU team that we've been talking about all year. I could say 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I liked maybe Kansas State to win the game. They didn't. I liked West Virginia the next week to pull the upset. They didn't. And then I just stopped picking against TCU because they just win every single week. So I think if I was to play the game, which I'm not going to, I would take Kansas State plus the points just because I thought they were the better team the first one. TCU's playing with pressure. They need to win to make the playoff. If they lose, they probably don't make the playoff this year. Kansas State's going to be playing loose and free, so it's a nice advantage for K-State. I just find it tough to bet against TCU with the way they win, and now as of late have been covering.
You bring up that second half against K-State. 21-0, the Horned Frogs against the Wildcats in that first meeting, coming off a 62-14 beatdown of Iowa State. Just embarrassing for the Cyclones to go out last week in Fort Worth. The previous 10 rematches in the Big 12 title game, there have been 6 sweeps, so TCU is looking to make that 7. Also important to note, since 05, number I was able to extract here in my prep for the show, 46 instances of rematches in title games overall, 23-23, the underdog ATS. So it is pretty even. It's dead even, in fact. Toledo and Ohio. Phil, it's like Christmas comes early for you for championship weekend. We've got 2 MAC games, both with implications. UB trying to get bowl eligible, and then you have a team like Ohio who's playing in their first MAC title game since against Western Michigan, 2016, I think it was. But, Phil, Ohio hasn't won a MAC championship period since, I think, around my father was born, right? It's been a while.
1968.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and they're coming in. Let's see, what is the spread? 2.5-point underdogs, 55.5 is the total. 12 o'clock, the MAC has moved it off Friday to Saturday, teed up alongside the Big 12. What do you make of the Rockets and the Bobcats on Saturday?
Yeah, and for those of you watching, let's have a round of applause for Kyle there for doing all that research on the championship games. And even though he came up with 23-23, at least we know the number now. So nice job, Kyle. Glad you went back and did the legwork on that. But as far as this game goes, this MAC title game, Toledo had the MAC West clinch 2 weeks ago, and they played like it. DeQuan Finn didn't play against BG, came in for a little bit against Western Michigan, and they're like, you know what, we're going to keep him healthy for the MAC title game. Pulled him out of the game early, and they end up losing both games. So they sort of back into this with no momentum. And meanwhile, Ohio, if you watch their defense the first 6 weeks of the season, you would be betting the over like crazy because they were giving up about 600 yards per game the first 6 weeks. But that defense has been getting better and better each week. And the thing I do when I'm watching a game, I generally watch the line of scrimmage. And Ohio is just getting great penetration up front. A lot of pressure on the quarterback, blowing up the run game. In fact, they've given up just 59 yards per game the last 4 weeks, 2.8 yards per carry. And they've generated 13 sacks those last 4 weeks as well. So they're playing great defense. Now, Curtis Rourke, their quarterback, is by far their best QB. He missed last week. It was C.J. Harris who took it. Rourke will be out here. His season's done. So it's C.J. Harris, a backup quarterback. But Toledo's been playing a backup quarterback. And how long will DeQuan Finn play? I think you have 2 really good defenses here. So I would actually lean a little bit with the under because both defenses are playing really well right now and both teams have backup quarterbacks. But I like Ohio to win this game. They come in with great current form. They're 6-1 over the last 7 games. The defense is playing great. The offense has been unstoppable. Toledo sort of backs into this one. So I'm going to go with Ohio to get their first MAC title since 1968.
One note out of the game notes as well, just to further add some shine to Ohio. Head coach Bill Hess had earned Coach of the Year honors after leading that team to a season, going undefeated until their 49-42 loss at the Tangerine Bowl against Richmond. The team had 7 first-team All-MAC selections, 3 second-team All-MAC honorees, so certainly waxing poetic are the Bobcats in the game notes ahead of this matchup on Saturday.
All right, let's jump over to the Sun Belt. It's a 3:30 kick for Coastal Carolina at Troy. Coastal is coming in 9-2, but they have not been a good team against the spread this year. 4-6-1 on the year ATS. Troy, meanwhile, they're 10-2, 9-3 against the spread. After an early loss to Ole Miss, they ended up starting the season 1-2. They had that crazy game with the Miracle on the Mountain against App State. So they start 1-2, but they've rattled off 9 in a row. Coastal kind of got embarrassed last week. Kyle, I'm not trying to rub it in. JMU 47-7, but Grayson McCall questionable for this game. I think that would have a lot to do with the total for me in a bet, but what do you see in this game, Phil, with Coastal coming in getting 8.5 points?
Yeah, and I know Troy has not been covering the spread in their games, but I've been very impressed with Troy this season. That defense has been downright dominant. In fact, you go back on the season, they're holding opponents to 85 yards per game below their season average, number 10 in the country. They get great pass rush, 35 sacks. They sack the quarterback 8.8% of the time. And here's the key here for Troy's offense. They really hadn't had a run game. They hadn't topped 150 yards rushing all year. And then Kamani Vidal, the last 2 weeks, has just exploded out of the running back spot. He's got a pair of 200-yard games. He had 242 yards against ULM and then 208 against Arkansas State in the final. So now with a run game to go along with Gunnar Watson and the throw game, I think you see a Troy team that's playing great complete football. And as mentioned, I've been very impressed with them in almost every single game this season. Now, Coastal, on the other hand, I'm not going to overreact to last week's game. I mean, that was Troy's Super Bowl. They wanted to prove could be the Sun Belt champs, even though they couldn't play in the Sun Belt game. Coastal Carolina came in with this game on deck. They came in with a backup quarterback. You sort of figured that James Madison would have a really good shot at winning that one big. But I haven't been blown away with Coastal all year. You can go back and take a look at their games. They barely got past Georgia Southern, barely got past ULM, got blown out by Old Dominion. The Marshall game, they played a great first quarter, and then Marshall dominated the final 3 quarters. App State was a really good home game for them. I was impressed with them in that game. Southern Miss, they probably should have lost that game. Southern had the advantage. I thought, but just turned the ball over too many times. And then the James Madison game. So in the last 7 games, I've been impressed with one Coastal game. I've been impressed with Troy most of the way. Troy's at home. They're only laying 8.5. I like the Troy Trojans to get this one at home.
I love the Grayson McCall factor. If he's going to play, I'm loading up on Coastal. Tease for my top plays later in the show. Phil will certainly give his, coming off a perfect week where he went 3-0, giving you his top plays. All right, where are we at? Fresno State at Boise State. 4 o'clock on Fox, Mountain West title game. Fresno State is catching 3.5. 54.5 is the total. Now, the last time these two teams met, by the way, just stellar Mountain West record. 7-1 is Fresno. 8-0 was Boise State. Both got off to slow starts. In fact, Fresno fell to 1-4 on the year after losing 40-20 to Boise State back on October 9th. Since then, the Bulldogs have not lost. So Fresno is on a heater. Boise is on a heater after starting 2-2. They finished 7-1. Taylon Green at quarterback has been the truth for the Broncos. Jake Haener did not play in that first matchup. We know he is a gamer, an absolute challenger when it comes to these situations. I expect him to play well. I like Fresno State here in this underdog position, looking for redemption against Boise State in a title game. Where do they play this one at? This one's going to be... Yeah, this is a campus site, Albertson Stadium on the Smurf turf. So, Phil, how do you handicap this one?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Kyle, we have 2 teams that are playing their best ball of the year right now. Boise opened up the year 2-2, came off that big loss at UTEP, and then they fired their offensive coordinator. Hank Bachmeier left the team. The team was turned over to Taylon Green, and they've been great. They've gone 7-1 straight up. 7-1, almost 7-1 against the spread. They had that BYU loss, which was a meaningless game because they were trying to win the Mountain West. They were at home. Yes, BYU is a good team, but winning the Mountain West, I think, was the bigger thing for Boise. And now here they are on the blue turf, a nice advantage to have. And with Fresno, you talked about it, 1-4 start, but Jake Haener got injured against USC. They lost the Connecticut. They lost the Boise game. They managed to win a game with Logan Fife at quarterback, but then once Jake Haener returned, he got off to a slow start against New Mexico with 225 yards, and now all of a sudden they've just been explosive on offense. And I also like the way Jordan Mims has started to run the football. Now, I just checked the weather recently on this. It's the game's being played at 2 p.m. Mountain. It should be about 35 degrees with the sun out, and they take the temperature in the shade. So if the sun's out, it'll probably be in the 40s, which isn't too bad a temperature for Fresno. It's not like you're going to have snow and freezing conditions, which I think would have aided the more cold weather Boise State team. I think these two teams pretty even. Boise's got the home edge, but you said, Kyle, the line's 3.5. I got to lean with the underdog plus the 3.5 in that one.
Love it.
Yeah, I like Jake Haener a lot too. The only thing scaring me away was the line. I kind of, at first glance, thought that maybe Fresno State could have possibly been favored in this game. But Phil, you make a lot of sense of what you say with the home field advantage there for Boise. So let's jump over to the American Conference. We've got UCF playing at Tulane. Tulane 3.5 point. I've seen it up to 4 now, as the Green Wave are favored. The total at 56.5. You want to hear something sad? Listen to my last few picks involving games where UCF has played. I had them to cover versus Navy. We saw what happened. I think they were like a 15, 16-point favorite. They lose to Navy. I picked against them in their last meeting against Tulane. They covered by a touchdown when I was on Tulane in that game. And then I had Cincinnati plus 2.5, and UCF won by 4 a couple weeks back. I mean, the list just goes on and on with UCF. It's just a team I can't seem to get on the right side of this year. But Tulane's coming off a big win over Cincinnati last week, and they won at Nippert, which is really, really hard to do. That was a big accomplishment for the Green Wave there. I mentioned already, UCF, they won the last game on November 12th, 38-31. This is UCF's last game in the American Conference. Phil, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, and I thought the key for me was I was hoping that John Rice Plumlee would play. Listening to Gus Malzahn this morning, he says he's been practicing all week, will play. That's a big plus. Of course, if he goes down during the game, I like the way that Mikey Keene's playing. Going back to those 3 games you talked about, Trip, I had UCF over Cincy. I had UCF over Tulane. I also did have UCF over Navy, which didn't work out so well. But I've had a pretty good pulse on UCF this year. I like the way they played in that first game against Tulane. Remember, they led 31-14 heading into the second half, and then Tulane got a little bit of a comeback. UCF might have let up a little bit. Still finished the game with a 468, 391-yard edge. You do have John Rice Plumlee available here. I've said all season long I thought UCF was the most talented team in the American Conference. You've got Tulane coming off a huge win and coming back home. I like UCF plus the points, not only to cover the game, but I like them to win this one outright.
What do you think of the psychology aspect of Willie Fritz remaining at Tulane? Because, Phil, I felt one way about this game when it seemed like it was already being reported by some journalists in Atlanta that Willie Fritz was the next Georgia Tech head coach. Instead, no, not a done deal, not so fast. He ends up remaining in New Orleans. So I think this can provide such a lift, such a boost for a team that at one point earlier in the week was losing their head coach after what has been a dream season, a once-in-a-lifetime type year for Tulane getting to this point. New Year's Six game, the Cotton Bowl is on the line. You have your head coach. He is remaining in New Orleans. I think that can be the added boost to help Tulane win in this redemption game over UCF.
It's possible. I remember years ago there was an Aloha Bowl, and I can't remember the specific teams, but coming up to the game, the one coach was supposed to be leaving for Kansas. And then he announced in the locker room prior to the game, you know what? I'm not going to Kansas. I'm staying here. Maybe it was the Kansas head coach and said, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. And that team came out and won the game. Now, that was in the locker room prior to the game. The team got all fired up. They'll be fired up here. But I also think UCF's going to be fired up, thinking they can win the American Championship game. So, it's not like one team wants to win and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, the health of John Rice Plumlee and his effectiveness, though, certainly will be a huge deal as the Knights make their return trip, coming back to Ullman Stadium for the second time in less than a month. That is a 4 o'clock game on ABC. Also at 4 o'clock, it's the SEC Championship. Georgia already in the playoff, much like Michigan. We'll get to the Wolverines in a moment. They can afford a slip-up, either Michigan against Purdue or Georgia against LSU. Both have just been so dominant, but Georgia against the spread, they're favored by 18.5 now. Last check, 50.5 is the total. 6-6 only ATS this year for Kirby Smart's group. They didn't win the SEC title last year, falling to Alabama. Their last one was 2017 when they had won Auburn. They eventually had lost in the national title game against Alabama and Tua Tagovailoa in overtime. But I think there's some motivation there for Georgia and Kirby Smart to get that SEC title that they haven't had in 5 seasons. And when they're only favored by 20 or less, so less than 20 points, Phil, they are 3-0 this season. So they do play better when that number is inside of 20. How do you think it'll play out at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there, Kyle. I like Georgia in this one. And for what you just mentioned, last year they may have won the national championship, but they were not SEC champs. And Kirby Smart has been playing that up all week. He wants that SEC title. And, I think you're going to get a 100% Georgia. And it's a Georgia team that, last week they took it off a little bit, as I expected. I thought Georgia Tech would play a good game against them. And it was 10-7 at the half. Then they put the hammer down the second half and played a lot better. I think when you look at these two teams, Georgia deserves to be the number one team in the country. They are elite on defense. They are elite on offense. They can run the football. They can throw the football with Stetson Bennett. LSU sort of did it with smoke and mirrors this year. They had some comeback wins early, and then they played their best ball maybe in the big games. Mississippi with the final 3 quarters, the Alabama game, they played their best game. But other than that, they haven't blown me away. I think defensively, there's a lot of the red that I'm looking at in the Phil Steele plus that we have. And then offensively, Jaden Daniels is questionable for this game. Now, if he's not 100% and his mobility has been a key factor to their offense, then I think Georgia can really take him out of the game and turn this one into a bigger score. So I think very motivated Georgia in this one. The game's being played in Atlanta. I like Georgia minus the points.
Yeah, certainly Brian Kelly has had an unexpected year one on the Bayou, leading the Tigers to 9-3. But you're right, the health of Daniels certainly in question. He has been a significant piece this year. Certainly one of the top dual-threat quarterbacks, second nationally in rushing yards as a quarterback with 884, 15 TDs, 2 interceptions in the passing game. He's been efficient, but if he's going to be limited, that's going to hurt their chances even more. And look for Georgia to stretch the passing game out, throwing at a guy like Harold Perkins, who has been awful in pass coverage over the last couple of weeks. As good as he is sideline to sideline, I think Georgia is certainly going to look to run it up and make a statement here against LSU on Saturday. Tripp, take us to the evening, the ACC, a game that does not matter, right?
Apparently. Yeah. ACC championship in Charlotte, 8 p.m. kickoff between Clemson and North Carolina. Clemson, kind of another disappointing 10-win season for them. The Tigers are 10-2, 6-6 against the spread. UNC 9-3. They're also 6-6 against the spread this year. Both teams are coming off a bad loss. Clemson let that one slip away against South Carolina this week. I mean, let South Carolina in the playoff. Good Lord, who wants to play those guys right now? But anyways, UNC coming off 2 bad back-to-back losses against Georgia Tech 2 weeks ago in a game that they led 17-0, and then they lost last week to NC State in overtime. I don't know, Phil, do you think Drake May can keep the Tar Heels close in this one, or do you like the other side with Clemson?
Yeah, to me, the best play in this one is probably the over. And that goes to the fact that North Carolina's defense all year has given up a lot of yards, a lot of points. DJ Uiagalelei had by far his worst game of the season last week. I don't think that's going to repeat this year, especially taking on a defense like North Carolina, which is allowing opponents 75 yards per game above their season average, which is number 126 in the country. And Clemson, watching them this year, they have been susceptible to the pass. You go back to that Louisiana Tech game, they gave up 311 yards. Wake Forest probably could have thrown for more than 337 yards in that game. And last week, Spencer Rattler, who did light up Tennessee, lit him up for 360 yards and looked like the Spencer Rattler you thought he would be at the start of the year, just not the one that was in the other 10 South Carolina games this year. So a susceptible secondary against Drake May has me thinking North Carolina can score. A North Carolina defense that pretty much lets everybody score on them against a potent Clemson offense. I mean, Shipley can run the football. They've got, I think DJ will have a much better game. So I like the over in this one. Probably lean a little bit with Clemson minus the points because they have the better defense, but over would probably be my best play.
It's another one of those games. Who wants to be there more? I think North Carolina wants to be there more, and an opportunity to beat Clemson, no matter how bad you've been defensively or how much you've struggled here and faltered over the last couple of weeks. A chance to earn an ACC title certainly means more for a team like North Carolina versus Clemson that doesn't have a shot at getting into the playoff, which is certainly their goal each and every year to win a national championship. Final game, Phil, of Championship Saturday. Purdue and Michigan. Wolverines favored by 16.5. 51.5 is the total. 8 o'clock on Fox. In this game a year ago, by the way, it could have been a rematch, but Iowa didn't take care of business on Black Friday against Nebraska, and then Purdue was able to overcome an early deficit against Indiana. Didn't matter that Illinois pounded Northwestern. So Purdue comes out of the West, and Jeff Brom is in a spot, Phil, where he's had a lot of success against top 5 teams overall in his career, right? That kind of makes me leery of the Michigan side here, but it was 42-3 Michigan over Iowa a year ago. I don't think we're going to have that same sort of game this Saturday. What do you think of the Wolverines and the Boilermakers? 8 o'clock teed up on Fox.
Yeah, and let's go back to last year's Big Ten title game. I mean, it was a game where in the first half, Iowa had a long drive and missed a field goal. The score was only 14-3 at the half, could have been 14-6 at the half, but Iowa didn't have an offense last year. They didn't have an offense this year. And then once it got to that point, you knew they weren't going to be able to catch up, and taking Iowa away from their run game and keep the game close turned it into a blowout. Now, you talked about Jeff Brom. He's taken on 3 top 5 teams. And he's not only 3-0 against the spread in those games. How about 3-0 straight up? And we know Purdue's record against number 2 teams in the country. It's extremely good. So I think it's a Purdue team that even if they get down to Michigan, I think they've got the capability of catching up. You've got Aiden O'Connell with that short pass game, which could negate the Michigan pass rush. And you also have the emergence of Devin Maccabee at the running back spot. He's a walk-on, but he's been doing a great job. Brom can hurt you running the football or throwing the football. Michigan doesn't really know what to expect. I think they would rather have an Iowa or an Illinois, a team that they know what to expect. And I don't know if Blake Corum's going to play. Maybe they keep him healthy for the playoff. You are in a legitimate letdown spot here, and you're laying a lot of points. So this is not going to turn into a replay of last year's Big Ten title game for the fact that Purdue can't strike back if they get down. I'm going to take Purdue plus the points to keep it closer than expected.
One storyline, too, Aiden McConnell, who got a late start on prep, the Purdue quarterback for this week. You know, how effective, how useful might he be this weekend? You have to expect he's going to give it a go, but dealing with the tragic loss of his brother this past week. So Purdue will certainly come in motivated, looking to tarnish what has been an incredible, dominant, undefeated regular season for Michigan, who they weren't in this spot a year ago, you know, after squandering the lead against Sparty and losing to Little Brother. But now at 12-0, a chance to go to 13-0. Just remarkable what Jim Harbaugh has done since getting his salary, cut in half, having to, dish out some pay cuts to his assistants, retool the staff, and look what Michigan has become. And we didn't even see all their playbook. It seemed like we saw, maybe 40% of their playbook up until last week, Phil, against Ohio State. I mean, they went with the deep passing game, and it worked out. What'd you make of that game at the Horseshoe last week between Michigan and Ohio State, where Wolverines turned a 4-point lead into an absolute blowout in the second half?
Yeah, big plays. I mean, you had 4 plays of like 70 yards in the game. In fact, something I want to point out, the narrative has been that Michigan just ran the ball down Ohio State's throat. I mean, they ran for 252 yards and 7.2 yards per carry last week, right? They were dominant. Well, actually, they had a 75-yard run and an 85-yard run. So you take those two out of the equation. They ran the ball 33 times for 92 yards, 2.8 yards per carry. So 2 big runs were really the key to the 258 yards. 160 yards of that came on just 2 runs in the game. So I think it was Ohio State's zero coverage on the defensive backs. Really made it with everybody bunched up front, they were able to get those 4 big plays, and that's really what turned the game around. And then the one other thing I want to point out about the Big Ten title game last year to this year, let's face it, if Michigan loses this game, they're in the playoff. They can afford to lose it. Last year, they couldn't afford a second loss. They wouldn't have made the playoff last year. So I think Michigan's in a different situation than they were in last year.
If you're looking for a prop on this game, too, J.J. McCarthy, I'm only seeing a rushing total of just under 20. I mean, I like him to maybe do a little bit more with his legs Saturday against Purdue. I don't think they'll need the passing game as much, but certainly saw a different dimension of this Michigan offense a week ago against Ohio State. So that is the final 10 conference title games this weekend, including Buffalo and Akron, with Buffalo looking to get bowl eligible on Friday. And I don't want to ask Phil about New Mexico State in a moment, but there's no late night chasing because, again, those are all the games. Phil, Washington hit as part of your top 3 a week ago. You were perfect. I know you're going to have one big play for us again, but before we get your play of championship weekend, we've got to give Tripp his time, right? Florida State is now playing. They're awaiting a big bowl game, perhaps. In his seminal moment, I want to focus this on the play of Jordan Travis because, Phil, I'm already hearing some murmurs that Jordan Travis could be a Heisman candidate, if you will, or get some pub heading into next season. I don't know if Tripp's buying into that, though. So, Tripp, what do you think? And then I'm curious what Phil thinks about the stock of one Jordan Travis heading into next year.
I love Jordan Travis. I'm a big Jordan Travis fan. You can easily see just how bought in he is to everything they're doing in Tallahassee. I just don't know if I can buy him as a Heisman candidate because look, if you look at the game against Florida, so many. He's an unbelievable runner. It seems like sometimes their best offense is to call a passing play, let the play break down, and just let JT make something happen with his legs. But he's probably taken a step forward in the passing game, but I don't know if he's taken a big enough step for me to trust him with being a Heisman contender. And I really don't know how much of a real look. Florida State, I think they're checking in at 13th right now. So if they win a bowl game, very good chance that a 10-win Florida State team could be a top 10 preseason team next year, perhaps. So if you're in the preseason top 10, your goal has to be a national championship, or at least making the college football playoff. I don't know if they can do that with Jordan Travis. I hate to even say that, but I think a few weeks back when Tate Rodemaker came in against Louisville and you saw the offense just keep on clicking because Rodemaker, he's a little bit better thrower of the football. Now, I know the floor is way lower for Florida State with Tate Rodemaker, but if they've got some other quarterbacks there, Rodemaker, A.J. Duffy was a very highly touted recruit. They just got another recruit to switch. I think Brock Glenn from Ohio State. He's going to play for Mike Norvell now. So I'm not sure. I just wonder if the ceiling is high enough for Florida State with Jordan Travis at the controls. What do you think on that, Phil?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. In fact, if you ask me right now who the best team in the ACC is and who I would favor over any other ACC team, it'd be Florida State. They're coming in number 8 in my average game grade right now. They're playing great football, both offensively and defensively. And when you take a look at next year, who are you going to favor over Florida State in the ACC? I do think they have a great shot at entering the season in the top 10. And with Jordan Travis, I watched him last year throw the football, and it was not impressive. I mean, 15-6 ratio was okay, but I wasn't overwhelmed. This year, he made great strides, improved to 63% completions, 22 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. If he could take that step up again next year, he could be a very good throwing quarterback. And to add that to his running skills and playing, the key is playing for a team that's contending for the title. You can't be up there for the Heisman unless your team's having great success. So I think Florida State could have all those factors going for him. I think he will be a Heisman candidate.
And plus, they could have a lot of guys coming back. I think they're going to lose Jared Verse. He could come back, but I think his stock might be a little too high right now to return to school. But Florida State should be returning a lot of talent, a lot of production next year.
Easy trip. Don't go run into the bank, all right, or to your bookie on the Heisman futures for Travis, or more importantly, the national championship futures. Let's let it simmer a bit. Phil, Tripp hasn't had that kind of excitement with FSU in, 7 or 8 years it'll be certainly since their national title in 13, was it, with Jameis. So, okay, Phil, time for your last power play of the year for the Phil Steele Show, the first year of this program. Again, thank you to all of you that have been watching all season long. At CS Now Tweets every Thursday at 1 o'clock. You know where to find Phil on Twitter at PhilSteele042 and at PhilSteele.com. Phil, what do you like most about championship weekend?
Yeah, the games we talked about, which pretty much everyone, I'm going to go with UCF. As mentioned, I think they can win the game outright. They're getting over a field goal here. They're getting 4 points, and they won the first game and led that one 31-14. So I like UCF plus the 4 over Tulane.
And it's coming off a 3-0 week. I went 2-1, hit on Duke as the underdog again. The Blue Devils have been so successful for me. Mike Elko certainly will be ACC Coach of the Year, no doubt. BYU even was able to cover that 6.5 at Stanford. I know Phil was leery on that one. But, yeah, Coastal Carolina hurt me in a big way, but they're not going to hurt me this weekend. If Grayson McCall's playing, which I'm assuming he is, I'm going all in on Coastal as the underdog, currently catching 8.5. I think McCall is going to be worth even more. So give me the 8.5 right now for Coastal. This will be kind of a, in a way, similar to what the reasoning behind my pick for Fresno, but a Lifetime Achievement Award of sorts for Grayson McCall, who still may stick around. He might transfer. He may play another year. He may go with Jamie Chadwell if Chadwell gets hired elsewhere. But if McCall, the warrior that he is, with a 21-1 ratio, missed the last 2 regular season games, Sunbelt Offensive Player of the Year for a 3rd consecutive season. That's never been done. I'm going to hitch my wagon to a Coastal Carolina team with Grayson McCall this weekend, catching 8.5 at Troy. Give me Coastal to win the Sunbelt. I also like Georgia covering the 17.5. You can find it out there. Give me that They're 3-0 ATS when the spread is less than 20. As we talked about, fifth time they're meeting the Tigers in the SEC title game. They trail all time 1-3. And then for my third pick, I will go with Jake Haener as an underdog. 3.5-point underdog against Boise State on the Smurf turf. This will be the Lifetime Achievement Award for Haener, who's thrown 64 touchdown passes all time in his career at Fresno State, career that started at Washington. He's battled injuries. I like them in this spot. They haven't lost since losing to Boise State earlier this year. So I'll take Coastal, Georgia, and Fresno State here on championship weekend. And Tripp is coming off another teaser win weekend.
That's right. The teaser has very quietly went 2-0 over the last 2 weeks, and we have gone 3-1 over the last 4 weeks. So some good picks on the teasers here lately. I've got another one. We'll do 4 teams this week on a 6-point teaser. I'm teasing UNC Clemson total down to 57.5. I think Phil liked the over in that game originally. I know I think everybody's on Georgia right now. If you tease them down, my book's at 18.5, so we'll get them down to 12.5 is the number that the Bulldogs will have to cover in the SEC championship. I've got Akron and Buffalo going over 49. And originally I like Boise State, but after listening to Phil, we're going to scrap Boise State and take UCF because we can get UCF with 10 points now in a game that it seems like Phil thinks maybe they could win outright. And last week, look, I had Tulane, Florida State, UTEP. Great pick there, Phil. Thank you on that one. The under in Louisville, Kentucky. Thank you again, Phil. So that's what hit last week. But, yeah, feeling good about this one too.
The Sickos will finish the year 10-4. Such a strong start. Fizzled down the stretch. Army and UMass, the total combined score was 51, 44-7. The Black Knights over the Minutemen. Army scored 16 fourth-quarter points. Like, what are we doing? Including a 54-yard touchdown run to put it over that came with 1:20 remaining in the contest. I mean, come on. A UMass team that only allowed 20 points to Texas A&M and College Station, who just walloped LSU this past weekend, allowed 44 to Army. No idea. Pulling my hair out. I don't even have any hair. I don't know what's going on. We're not picking a sicko, but I do want to lean to help me feel a little bit better. My father's alma mater, which, by the way, he was born in 63, so 5 years before Ohio last won a MAC title game in 68. But my dad's alma mater is Valpo. FCS team had to petition to get an extra game, a 12th game against New Mexico State, who also has a petition in to try and become bowl eligible because they had the game against San Jose State taken away from them earlier this year. Jerry Kill has been onions for me a lot this year. It's a 3 o'clock game, a game that was added on Tuesday night. I don't have a line. I don't know if it exists yet, Phil. You're obviously the dean when it comes to that, but what do you think about Valpo, New Mexico State, and even Jerry Kill's chances of getting a bowl game over who would be maybe Rice, the leading APR team, but they only have 5 wins?
Yeah, I think there's a shot. And in this game, I definitely like New Mexico State. They're laying 29 points. And if you go back, New Mexico State played an FCS team a little bit earlier in Lamar. They not only beat them 51-14, at the half, they led 37-0 with a 270-63. And if you follow the FCS, Lamar's a decent team. Valpo's playing in a non-scholarship league, and they didn't even know they were going to play this game. You knew Jerry Kill was saying, we're going to find another game, so stay ready. The Valpo players probably finished last week and said, we're done, we're going home. Then they get a call, hey, we're playing a game this week. So I think the situation favors New Mexico State, the fact they're at home, and the fact that they beat Lamar handily in the first one, and Lamar's a better team than Valpo. Hate to go against your dad's alma mater there, Kyle, but I'm going to go with New Mexico State minus the 29.
It's fine. I will take New Mexico State in this FCS position. Yeah, just weird. All of a sudden you're adding a game. It's got some COVID vibes to it, especially how some of the bowl games had played out over the last couple of years and replacement teams on the schedule. So it won't affect New Mexico State if they win because they can't get another FCS one to help them become bowl eligible. So hopefully that petition, that waiver that they've signed up for will help them get a bowl game anyways, even with 5 wins. Because if Rice gets in, that's 6 bowl teams I help to manage their broadcast ops each and every week. I've got 7 schools I'm responsible for, Phil. Right now I'm at 5 that are bowling, and Rice would make it 6. So what is supposed to be an easy month would not be an easy month for your boys. So that's it. That's it for the Phil Steele Show. Tripp, you got any parting words before we get out of here?
Just a big thanks to Phil for doing the show with us this year. I mean, everybody over here looks at your magazine as kind of the Bible for college football, and I've been reading it forever. So this was just it was a lot of fun getting to talk football with you every Thursday.
Yeah, and I'll say this, like you said before, Kyle, this was a 15th show. I find that hard to believe. Seems like just yesterday we were starting a very quick football season, but I had a lot of fun all year long with Tripp, Kyle. Definitely a lot of fun doing the show with you guys all season long. Look forward to doing it again next year.
Yeah, the book The Experts Cannot Do Without. If you never got it, you did it wrong. Do better next year. We certainly couldn't have done it without you, Phil. So follow him on Twitter at PhilSteele042. He's Tripp Hurd at Tripp Hurd. I'm at Kyle Shass. And yeah, hopefully we can run it back next year. So gamble, tease, and lean with us. GTL with us always. And thank you for betting smarter with the Phil Steele Show each and every week. Thank you.